We have to make an adjustment here.
Thank you so much. You know how to make me feel better. My name is Toni C, and I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic. I'm so glad to be here, and I just appreciate the committee inviting me. And I'm having so much fun, and I am absolutely terrified as I look out over this crowd. I have never stood before a sight this ominous in my whole life. It is absolutely terrifying. I teach stress management seminars to companies. And I need one badly right now. I've practiced everything I teach for the last hour, and I still have cold, clammy hands. But I'm so glad to be here. It is a thrill. As I listened to you this morning talking about this crowd and all of us drinking, can you imagine a world well enough for this crowd of people drinking? If all of us were drinking at the same time, it is wonderful to look out there and to see all of you and to see all of us sober. It is the most powerful, powerful sight. I appreciate the committee having me here, and I appreciate Nancy and Frank entertaining me royally and being my hostess and host, and I'm having so much fun. But I knew yesterday I was not well enough to be here, because when I left Atlanta yesterday and I had asked my daughter to come to my office and pick up my car, and I had wanted to leave her the keys, and I had written her a little love note. I had put everything in a little envelope and had written her a love letter and told her how much I loved her and how much I appreciated her getting my car. And then I went out to the car and I drew a little happy face and wrote "I love you" and stuck it on the steering wheel, and then locked the car. And as Frank and Nancy and I were walking down the hall yesterday to my room, I reached in my pocket, and there were the keys to my car. So my daughter doesn't even find the notes that say "I love you." They're inside the car that she can't get in. But I'm glad to be here anyway. You're looking at a lady with a lot of gratitude today, because I came rolling into Atlanta at 2:30 Monday morning from Hawaii. Oh, is right. And I had been sent to Hawaii by a company to do an intervention with one of their top executives who had been holed up drunk in Hawaii for 2 years. Now, I'm telling you, they could have hired somebody in Hawaii a whole lot cheaper than they could fly me from Atlanta to Hawaii to conduct that intervention. But I tell you that because I was in demand for that company. And I have so much gratitude in my heart for that, because 10 years ago, I was not in demand anywhere. Least of all in my own house, I was not in demand. And this year, this company sent me from Atlanta to Hawaii to conduct this intervention. And in lieu of a fee, I asked them to pay my 18-year-old daughter's expenses over there, and we just had one heck of a beautiful vacation over there, all expenses paid. So you're looking at a lady with a lot of gratitude today, because if it were not for the fact that I'm an alcoholic, that would not be possible. I would not have recovered. I would not have been trained in that particular intervention model and procedure, and that company would not have known that I could do that, and they wouldn't have wanted me to go over there. So all of this is due to my alcoholism. And I find that it is my alcoholism that is that has given me everything that's important to me today. Everything that's valuable to me is there because I'm an alcoholic and because I'm a recovered alcoholic. And the things that are so precious to me today are precious because of what I've gotten from the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. As I listened to Frank last night talk about our feelings, it was almost as if he was telling my story when he described his feelings. Beautiful message. And Venetia this morning, I sat there and listened to her and said, she's telling my story. Half of my story is Venetia's, and half of my story is the son of a bitch drinking. That's the other half of it. But we can all tell each other stories. That's the beautiful thing about our program, is that we have this fellowship where we can understand each other, where we can relate, and where we can come into a room together. And even though most of you in this room I don't know, I know you are friends I have not met yet in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's just so precious to me. I spent a large part of my life trying to be a good woman, trying to find God, growing up in that breeding ground for alcoholism, the Baptist Church. And I tried so hard to find God. Every time Billy Graham came through town, I rededicated my life to full-time Christian service. Tried to feel God, and I never felt that God was anything but something detached and out there. And it was not until I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that I found a God of my understanding, and that I have something that I have a conscious contact with. It is so real to me. And we say a God of my understanding. I don't really understand what God is. But there is something in my life that has been there since I've been in AA that gives me direction. And it's a force. I can feel it. I have faith in it. It's spiritual. It's not religious. It's a feeling. And I believe in it. And I have a lot of faith in it. And I call that God. And it works for me every time. And so whether I understand it or not, whatever God is understands me. And I have tremendous faith in God. And the fact that AA has given me a conscious contact with that God is the strong part of my program. It is the program. And Alcoholics Anonymous is the most powerful thing in my life. It is a part of every thought. It's a part of every feeling. And I just treasure it. But I never found that God until I got to AA. Alcoholism was in my family, and I didn't intend to drink. Even after I married and began to social drink, I was going to control it because I didn't want to turn out to be like my daddy, who actually died sober. But was an alcoholic when I was growing up, and just was a horrifying experience what we went through as a family. So I'm the child of an alcoholic and an alcoholic also. I married a young man, and after about 5 years, we also, Venetia, had 3 babies in 3 years. I wonder if that's a hazard of the disease of alcoholism. 3 babies in 3 years, and about the time my 3rd baby was born, I decided I would quit smoking. And when I quit smoking, I got so nervous, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just was a nervous wreck. And I went to the doctors, and they said, well, it's your nerves. Take these little pills. And so I did. And I took Nimbutal and Valium and Librium and Seconal and Elavil and Trivil and Cinequan and is right, and on and on and on. And over the next year, I took, abused, and was addicted to everything I took at that given time that I was taking it. And I hated the way pills made me feel. They made me feel worse than I already felt. Never did calm me down. So at the end of that, about a year, I decided I'm not fooling with these pills anymore. I'm going to put these down. And at that time, I was a social drinker. And if you had looked at me, you would have said I'd been a social drinker for 10 years. I know I controlled it to keep from turning out to be like my daddy. But I looked to you like a social drinker. And when I gave up the pills and continued drinking, within a matter of days, I was drinking alcoholically. And I never drank any other way until I got sober. There were periods of time when I didn't drink, but I was not sober. I was only dry. And I drank alcoholically, and immediately I could not function. I couldn't handle my responsibilities. I couldn't take care of my children. I began withdrawing from the world. I couldn't handle anything. I couldn't get my children to school. I couldn't pick them up. Fortunately, I had a full-time maid, and God did manage to take care of my children between my parents and my maid and other people who helped, and I'm very grateful for that. The headmaster would pull me out of the carpool line and not allow me to pick up my children, and I hated him at the time, but I'm very grateful for that today. And I withdrew from the activities. I pulled away from the Bridge Club and my Sorority Alumni Association and the garden clubs and my neighbors and the children's swim lessons and music lessons and dancing lessons, and began to withdraw and live in my bedroom. And drink all day and stay awake. I drink all night and stay awake, sleep all day. And very quickly that happened from the time I started daily drinking. Within a year and a half, I was hospitalized on a psychiatric unit where I suspect I was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, because that sure is, Venetia, what I looked like. But there, they told me I was not an alcoholic. And I thought that was just music to my ears. So I bought a bottle of wine on the way home from the hospital, and I was drunk within hours and on my way running again. And I had learned something. I couldn't handle hard liquor, whether the doctors thought I was alcoholic or not. I knew I had a problem and I couldn't handle hard liquor, so I switched to beer and wine. And I got just as drunk and twice as fat. And they sent me to a psychiatrist to see 3 times a week. And this psychiatrist put me on massive doses of Thorazine. Have you ever seen anybody with the Thorazine shuffle? You know, well, that's how I was for a year. I had the Thorazine shuffle, and I shuffled around everywhere I went. And I hated that. Interesting thing, the psychiatrist told me that Thorazine would help me to organize my thoughts. Well, my experience with Thorazine was that it stripped me of the ability to think, and we didn't have to worry about organizing any thoughts. And I promise you, it is funny only in retrospect, because that year I see as the worst year of my life, when I could not exactly want to live and I didn't exactly want to die. I felt like I was in a hole, that I was incapable. My psychiatrist had told me that I was so emotionally incapable and inadequate as a human being that I would never be able to live a day of my life without Thorazine. And I didn't want to live with Thorazine. I didn't want to live that way. And yet I didn't exactly want to die. It just was a hole I could not get out of. And it was a horrible time. I was hospitalized 2 more times in psychiatric hospitals where I was medicated half to death. And I vaguely even remember those hospitalizations because I was on so much medication. During this time, my controlling spouse decided to tap my telephone. He was determined I was going to behave. So he tapped my telephone and hired a private detective to follow me. Well, it didn't stop me from drinking, but it did change the pattern of my drinking. I was sure that those efforts were designed to take my children away from me. And it scared me to death, because the most precious thing in my life was my children. And I was afraid to go in the liquor store. And I began to look in the drugstore, in the grocery store, and I found one day a bottle of Micron mouthwash, and it said 18% alcohol. And I thought, I wonder if that works. Well, it does. And I went back and bought another bottle of Micron mouthwash, and I discovered that Scope had 18% alcohol in it also, and so did Listerine, and Cepacol, is that it? And I had the sweetest breath in town. And then I discovered things like vanilla flavoring, which is real potent, and lemon extract, which is worse, and it turns white when you add water to it to try to make a mixed drink. And you can feel it all the way down. You can feel your stomach being corroded. And I want you to know that it is all I can do, even today, to walk by the vanilla flavoring and the scope in the grocery store. My stomach does little flips, even today. I can still feel the way that felt going down. My point, though, is that if I am suffering from the active disease of alcoholism or addiction of any kind, and my drug of choice is not available to me, even if it's in my mind that it's not available, I will drink whatever is available. And I thought I couldn't go to a liquor store, and I could go to a grocery store and buy something, and that's what I did. And if you can say that what you drank the most of was your drug of choice, and that certainly makes a lot of sense to me, then my drug of choice the last 2 years I drank was vanilla flavoring. And I was married to a very, very wealthy man, very successful businessman. And I kept telling him I was not an alcoholic. Look at my luxurious lifestyle. I'm too good. I'm college educated. I've been a school teacher. I have this luxurious life. I am too good. Alcoholics are down on Skid Row, sleeping on the railroad tracks. And there I was in my third-story bedroom, drinking my vanilla flavoring, denying my alcoholism. I was a real embarrassment to my husband. He just was totally exasperated with me. He didn't know what to do. He kept trying to control me, and I wouldn't be controlled. He learned very quickly when we moved into our big new house that if he wanted any liquor when he came home, he'd better hide it, lock it up. So he put it in the liquor cabinet on the first story, and it didn't take me 5 minutes to figure out I could pull out the drawer in that cabinet, even though it was locked, and I could reach down behind there and get the liquor bottles out from there. So then he decided he couldn't figure out how he had locked that cabinet, and I was still drinking up all the booze. He couldn't figure it out. So then he put the cabinets were L-shaped, and so then he put all the bottles way back in the corner of the L so that I couldn't reach them when I would put my hand in it. So I went upstairs and I got a coat hanger, and I unwound that coat hanger, and I would get a flashlight and shine it through that drawer and hook the bottle with that coat hanger and slowly drag it across till I could pick it up. And he'd come home and the liquor was still gone. He just absolutely was so exasperated and frustrated he couldn't figure me out. And that's funny only in retrospect, because if you could have seen the pathetic times when I went down to that basement and there were 3 empty bottles for a long period of time that I had emptied and left down there. And time after time I would go down there and turn those bottles up, hope beyond hope that there was going to be something in there, when I was so desperate for a drink and in withdrawal so badly and had no money, no way to leave, telephone tapped, private detective following me, and just in a horrible pit of despair. That's the reality of alcoholism. That's the reality of it. And I was an embarrassment in our social life. Here was this successful young businessman and wanting to make an impression on his peers. And I remember one time we were down in the Keys at an invitational tarpon tournament, and many very influential people to him and powerful to him were there, and he wanted me to impress the president of the Coca-Cola company, and so I sure impressed him. I leaned down to kiss him at dinner, and my wig fell off in his dinner plate. Well, needless to say, I was taken home and I was not invited to any more of the social events of the Invitational Tarpon Tournament. It came time for that marriage to end, And I was just to leave. The deal was I would leave. There was no community property, I discovered. The deal was you just get out of here, leave. And I moved, and somehow miraculously the children were allowed to live with me at that particular time if I didn't drink. And only an alcoholic can understand how I could take a drink knowing that I was going to lose my children and have to take a drink anyway. I know that those of us who've experienced that addiction more powerful than anything else can understand what that is all about. But it's not a problem to me that it's difficult for the public out there to understand that. But if I ever thought I was in trouble as a married alcoholic, I had no idea how much trouble I could get into as a single alcoholic on the loose. But don't get your hopes up, because I am not going to tell you about that part of my story. But it was awful, and it's a miracle I lived through that period. During that time, my children were my parents. They were taking care of Mom, and Mom was the child in the home. I still have a vivid picture of my little boy standing on the front stoop at midnight begging me not to go out and get another drink. And me already drunk, and his knowing that I was not able to drive that car. And he was still standing on the porch when I came back. And I'm sure he was terrified, because he was about 7 years old and had full charge of the responsibility of his two little sisters, and they were in that house by themselves. That's alcoholism. You know, the alcoholic is anesthetized. You know, we suffer the least of all. It's the people around us who really have the brunt of this disease, because they have to deal with what's happening with raw emotions, with no anesthesia. And I wish it could have been as easy for my children as it has been for me. Another time I drank on top of antabuse after ODing and being hospitalized. I started taking antabuse, and it was a desperate attempt not to drink. If I could have ever stopped drinking on my own, I would have done it, because I tried hard. I really tried not to drink. And I fell and I cracked my head open on a chair after drinking on top of antabuse. And my son had the presence of mind and the responsibility to try to call a doctor and an ambulance and help for me. And my son was 8 years old. And my daughters tried to drag Mom to bed and mop up the blood on the white carpeting. And my daughters were 5 and 6 years old. And that is the disease of alcoholism. That's where it really is. And when I drank on antabuse that time, those children were taken away from me. And I lost full and permanent custody of those children. And I knew it was permanent. I knew those children were not coming back to me this time. We had shuffled back and forth a lot of times depending on my state of drunkenness. This time I knew it was permanent. And they were taken away. And I lay in bed for 5 days with the sheets pulled up over my head. And I wasn't sure I wanted to live. And I stayed drunk nonstop for 3 months. After that, I did nothing but drink and take pills, and drink and take pills. And I had my bottle down by my bedside, and my bottle of pills by the bed on the bedstand. Cirex was my pill of the day by this time, and anything was the liquid of the day. Vanilla flavoring, vodka, beer, wine, whatever I could get was the liquid of the day. It was a horrible time. Christmas Day, 1973. I woke up and I could see a little bit of light outside, and my clock said 7 o'clock. And I closed my eyes, took another drink, closed my eyes, opened my eyes again, and it was a little bit light outside, and my clock said 7 o'clock. Only 12 hours had gone by. And that was Christmas Day, 1973. Alone, without family, without friends, in total despair, and I hope I never forget that. Well, let me tell you, that was the beginning of the end. When I moved away from the big house, I moved into a condo, and I was trying to find a condo that was real close to where my children were in private school, because they went or got out at 4 different times during the day. And it was real difficult for me to maintain my addiction and have to jump in the car and drive over there 4 times a day. So I was wanting to find a house close to where they were going to school, and I could not. For some reason, I was compelled to buy a condo that turned out to be miles away from the school, maybe 10 miles, I'm not even sure. And all I knew at the time was that I was leaving 38 acres of land with a lot of woods and taking my children to a small condominium by comparison with no yard, and I thought this little condominium had some trees. It was an inn unit and it had some trees, and I thought, well, that will at least give my kids a little yard to play in. Well, I lay there in that condo drunk off and on for the next year, and I began to hear construction outside my bedroom window and looked through the trees there in the back of the house, and I could see a building, and it looked just like a school. And I thought, God, how lucky can I be? I have moved out here in the boondocks, and they're building a school right here in my backyard. Lucky me, my kids can walk right out the door and go to school. Well, my friend, that building turned out to be Peachford Hospital for the Treatment of Alcoholism. Built right in my backyard. And that is written on page 84 of the big book, and it says, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we are unable to do for ourselves. I like to believe God knew how sick I was, and he just made it easy for me. And after 3 months of nonstop drinking, I was admitted to Peachford Hospital at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning in a long black evening dress that I had had on for 4 days, and a crooked wig that I had had on for 4 years. But do you know, they did not laugh at me. They put, at least in front of me, they didn't laugh at me. They put their arms around me and they said, honey, we understand. We're glad you're here. We've been there. We know where you are. We're here to help you. And those people began to love me into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They began to love me well. It was the first time in my life, with the exception of my children, that I had ever experienced unconditional love. They didn't care what I'd done or where I'd been, even though I was racked with guilt about my behavior. They didn't care. They'd all been there, and they understood, and they began to love me well. And even though I went there not to get sober, but because I thought I needed medical attention and I wanted to learn to control my drinking so I could get custody of my children again, I left there wanting to stay sober. And I'd like to tell you that I did, but I stayed sober 10 months and had a relapse and had to go into treatment at Willingway Hospital. And I've been sober by the grace of God in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous since May 3rd, 1975. One of the things I learned during that relapse, which has become a real powerful thing in my program of recovery, is that I can't handle guilt. I tried to hide that relapse from you. I tried to keep it from you, and I would still go to meetings. And I learned a wonderful thing, that it does not matter what you know about me that's important. It's what I know about me that I've got to live with. And even though you didn't know I'd had a drink or a relapse, I knew it. And it just ate me alive. It just churned away and ate me alive until I went into treatment again. I also learned that I had managed to stay dry, I guess, for 10 months for the attention I got from other people. I'd been so sick when I got into treatment that first time that I was starved for attention, and when people would pat me on the back and say, "Oh, Toni, you're doing a great job. We're so proud of you," I just ate that up. And I was staying dry for that attention. And I learned that sobriety can't be dependent on attention. It's got to be dependent on my spiritual condition. It's got to be a personal thing for me. It can't be dependent on the attention I get from other people. And I don't mean that I don't like strokes today. I like to get strokes. I really enjoy that. But I want to be sober whether you even notice it or not. I just want to be sober. It's the way I choose to live. And I feel good sober. And it's given me everything I was always looking for. And so it's a real personal and spiritual thing to me today. I also learned I wasn't living one day at a time. I had been living to accumulate chips. I wanted to pick up chips in a room full of a whole lot of people so the world could see me sober. I wouldn't pick up a chip in a room of 10 people. I wanted everybody to see me. I wanted them to see me pick up that chip, accumulating time, forgetting that the deal is to be sober. It's not accumulating time. And I learned that because it was so tough to come back after that relapse and treatment again, and every day was so tough. And I had to struggle so hard to stay sober, and I value that so much because it's so precious to me because I fought so hard for it. But I accidentally learned to live a day at a time during the process of struggling every day just to survive and not drink. And I accidentally learned to live a day at a time. So many positive things for me and bases for my program came out of that relapse, and I'm real. I want to do whatever I need to do on a daily basis to have the foundation I need to stay sober, because it's the way I choose to live. And Alcoholics Anonymous has given me everything. I think it's the greatest time in the world to be a female in this society. I think it's the greatest time in the world to be an alcoholic in this society. And I think it's the greatest time to be a recovered alcoholic female in this society. I have never felt that I've been discriminated against for any of those things. I have grown and blossomed, and wonderful things have happened to me, and I have never felt that anybody did anything but look up to me because I'm a recovered alcoholic. So I don't want any anonymity. I didn't have any anonymity drunk, and I sure as hell want everybody to know I'm sober. Since I've been sober, I've had more powerful things to deal with than I ever had to deal with drunk. But the interesting thing is that I know I can handle anything sober. There is not anything that can happen to me that I can't handle. It may not be pleasant and it may be painful, but I can handle it. And to know that the one thing in this life that I cannot handle is a mind-altering drug of any kind, including alcohol. And that is a real comfort to me, because there are lots of folks walking around out there who don't have the foggiest idea what they can and can't handle. And I know that I can't handle a mind-altering drug, and I know that anything else that happens to me, I can deal with it. And I can deal with it because I've got a huge support system that gives me the tools to be able to deal with whatever happens. That's a lot of security to me. And I had a lot of heavy things to deal with, and I could tell you about a lot of days in my sober life. But I want to tell you about the most profound day in my whole life. It was the most traumatic day in my life, and it was the most glorious day in my life. All in one, all at the same time, and the most profound and powerful day I've ever lived through. After I'd been sober a while, I began getting messages that I needed to do something about my children. And it's real interesting, how you change. When I lost custody of the children, I thought it was the end of the world. By the time I began to get messages again that I needed to do something about them, I said, oh no, I can't handle that. I'm doing real well. I'm sober. I've got a little job going here. I'm rebuilding my life, and I'm not sure I can handle that. What if I fail? All of the what ifs and projections that we go through when new experiences are presented to us. And God absolutely beat my head into bloody little bits for the next 5 months and backed me into a wall until I finally had to file for custody. But it was real fascinating to me that God did not allow that to happen until I had fully accepted the fact that my children were not responsible for my sobriety. My happiness and my sobriety are not dependent on whether my children live with me or not. I always said, if you take my kids away from me, I'll never get sober. Ironically, I did, and I stayed sober. My children, even though I might prefer for them to live with me, don't have to live with me for me to be sober and for me to be happy. My happiness and sobriety are contingent on my spiritual condition on a daily basis. And when I learned that, God gave me a chance to have them back. And after fighting God's will for about 5 months, I finally broke down and filed for custody, only believing that it was His will, not understanding it. I'd had sponsors who absolutely had led me through that decision for 5 months, had been with me on a daily basis. I had 5 sponsors, 2 of them in particular I saw on a daily basis, and had helped me through that and supported me through it. Sometimes it seemed impossible because when I filed for custody, I was a working, recovered alcoholic female. I made about $3.50 an hour. I did not have the option of not working. I had to support myself. And the other side had a lot of money, hot and cold running help, a wife who did not work, and it just seemed impossible. It really did. And it got worse because the kids would tell me things that had been said to them, and it just seemed a futile effort. And one day I got an answer that I wasn't even expecting particularly. My kids were over and piled up on my bed, and they were saying, my Angie, my youngest, was saying, Mom, you wouldn't believe what they said about you. They said you tried to run Grandpa down with the car, and that you hit him in the face and broke his glasses and cut his face all up, and that you were always passed out on the floor with no clothes on. And I thought, I lived in blackout, so I thought, that's probably all true. I don't have any recollection of any of that, but it's probably all true. And I said, well, Angie, I used to do things like that when I was drinking. And with that, Angie burst into tears, started crying hysterically, thrashing her arms and legs around on the bed. And at that moment, I had such a hole in my stomach, and I thought, God, this family cannot go through any more pain. Why are you doing this to us? Why have you led me to this? This family cannot endure anymore. And God gave me an answer. And He said, through Angie's little lips, when Angie started talking and stopped crying, she said, Mom, I know you did all those things, but just don't tell the judge or we'll never get to live with you. And that has been a powerful message to me from a God that I don't understand, but who gives me messages through other people, and that I don't have to worry about what people say about me. I don't have to worry about that. There is a divine plan for my life. It's going to work out for the good of everybody, and there is a director in charge of it that I can trust and have faith in and depend on. Well, we went to court, and it was the most powerful day in my life. I went in shaking, had never been in a courtroom before. They asked me to share, and I was scared to death to talk. And then within 5 minutes, the most incredible calm came over me. And I began not only to answer questions, but to volunteer information, the sordid information as well as the recovery. I shared very much like I'm sharing with you, except in much greater detail because I was on the stand for 5 hours. And I shared and I told my whole story and volunteered it. And I couldn't even understand why I was doing that. I didn't even understand it at the time, except that I knew I was completely comfortable. And later I would understand that I had, by that time, become comfortable with myself in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had nothing to hide. And I had done my 4th step and my 5th step, and I had made my amends to the best of my ability, and I tried to live on a daily basis like I believe God wants me to live. And I was comfortable with my life, and I was willing to share anything, and there wasn't anything they could ask me that I wasn't willing to talk about. And the truth had set me free. The willingness to tell the truth had set me free. I did not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. And what a powerful experience that was for me that day in that courtroom. There's not anything I have to be afraid of sharing or want to hide. Everything I can be willing to share. Maybe not from a podium, but at least one-on-one or with a few people. And it was a wonderful experience to feel that freedom that I felt in that courtroom that day. It was the most traumatic day of my life. And that had to do with my sponsor, my beloved sponsor's testimony to help me get my children back. My sponsor, who had been with me on a daily basis for 5 months, had helped me through that decision. And he believed that there was a oneness in my relationship with my children and that we needed to be together. And we went in there with an attitude of love, of a mother's love and a children's love for their mother. We never said a negative word about the other side. I never said anything but compliments for the other side. And that's a wonderful thing for me to be able to live with, because the program of Alcoholics Anonymous did that for me, that I didn't have to go down in there and tear down somebody else. I could go in there on a positive vein. And my sponsor wanted to testify, and they put him on the witness stand, and they said, "Mr. Johnson, can you promise us that this woman will be sober next week?" And he said, "No, I cannot promise you that anybody in this courtroom will be sober next week. We cannot predict the future." And within 2 minutes, Jimmy Johnson was dead. He got down from the witness stand, and he took his wife, who was also my sponsor, outside the courtroom, and he could feel the flavor of that trial that day. He could feel it. It was in the air. You could feel it. And he said, "Honey, if we had written a script, we could not have written a better one. It is just following along, and God's plan is just following along, and you can feel it." And he said, "You know something, honey? We have 3 new grandchildren today. And let's go get a cup of coffee and celebrate." And at that moment, he had a massive heart attack. And he was gone. And I was angry. I was angry at God. I felt like he'd taken Jimmy away from me. I resented it. I felt responsible for his death. I felt alone. And it was a terrifying, agonizing time. And then a wonderful thing happened. All of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous came. held our hands. And in the worst tragedy of my life, it never occurred to me to take a drink or a pill. And that's the power of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I could appreciate it a little more later when I learned that an autopsy had shown that Jimmy had terminal cancer, and he would have died a very painful and maiming death in a very short period of time. And God did allow him to die with a smile on his face in the act of helping another human being. And that's the way he had lived his life. So I can be grateful for that. Well, it was also the most glorious day of my life. And as you would imagine, the glorious part was that I was awarded full and permanent custody of my children. When everybody, including my lawyer, said it could not be done. But it was done because it was God's will that we be together. And we have been together. And it has been a wonderful relationship that I have shared with my children. And I think we've all benefited from having gone through the disease of alcoholism together. And we've benefited even from the separation of 3.5 years. We've benefited from that. We're better off. We're richer people for having gone through all of that. My son is 20, and he's at the University of Georgia, and he's the most responsible person I know. As you would imagine he would be when he had the responsibilities of the entire household as a little tyke of 8, 7, and 6, and 7, and 8. How many mothers do you know of teenagers who could say their son was the most responsible person they know? Not many mothers say that. That's a benefit from the disease of alcoholism. He is only now beginning to be able to have some fun, to be able to play, and I'm so glad to see that. My middle daughter what has been known to say to me, Mom, I do not want to dwell on problems. I do not want to sit around and talk about problems. I have never had a problem in my life, and I do not want to sit around and talk about problems. Now, this is a child whose mother was an alcoholic, whose father was not available, who was bounced around from maid, to governess, to grandmother, to stepmother, to girlfriend, to mother. And she says, I have never had a problem in my life, and I do not want to sit around and talk about problems. She can adjust to anything. She has the most wonderful built-in acceptance of anybody I've ever seen. She has had so many adjustments to make in her life that nothing is a big deal to her. Nothing is a big deal. She can handle anything. And the little one is so affectionate and so loving. And I believe this comes from everything that we've gone through. She's very sensitive to other people. Her father is now in a wheelchair, unfortunately, and Angie is the sweetest little nurse to him. She takes such loving, good care of him, and very willingly, never complains about it. Just really can't do enough for him. She just loves giving and service. Now, I want you to go from this meeting and pray that Angie does not turn in to be the eternal Band-Aid box and marry an active alcoholic, which certainly could happen. But right now, she's very loving and giving, and it is not an unhealthy thing for her at this time. We have great relationships. My family life has gotten better because of the recovery in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Every phase of my life has gotten better because of the recovery in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. My career is out of sight. And all I am aware of doing, my friends, in Alcoholics Anonymous is showing up to stay sober And everything has moved me right along. I haven't pursued any of it. It has pursued me. And I know I am doing what God wants me to do. And that's such a good feeling. Because I never had that feeling until I got sober. But when I was discharged from Peachford, I went back every day because I was afraid of being alone. For the first time in my life, I was going to be alone and responsible for myself. No longer had a wealthy husband or parents to take care of me. I was on my own. I was scared to be there alone, so I went back to the hospital every day and sat there in what they call the dirty corner. That's because they tell dirty jokes. The patients sit around that corner and tell dirty jokes. And I'd sit there, and I got a lot of security just from the walls, whether anybody was there or not. And one day I was sitting there, and the head nurse came through, and she said, "Toni, did you ever get a job?" Well, I didn't have enough confidence in myself to even go and apply for a job, much less be working. She said, "How would you like to work in detox?" I said, "Great." So I went down there. I worked the dog shifts. I did all the work nobody wanted to do, and I took pride in it. And my job was to make up beds and sweep floors and haul trays down the hall. I took such pride in that work. And because I took pride in it, making up beds, and I did it well, and they promoted me along. And later I became a counselor in training, and then I became a counselor, and then I became the follow-up care coordinator. And then it fell my lot to design and develop the aftercare program for Peachford, which became a model for other treatment programs around the country, and I'm very grateful for that. But I like to say that I had the dubious distinction of being the only person on that staff who actually went from DTs in detox to aftercare coordinator. And I moved over and worked at Ridgeview, and I have been trained by some of the powers in this field. I just feel so lucky, and I've just been there. After 5 years, it was just time to go, and I had an opportunity to go over to Ridgeview Institute, another very fine program in Atlanta. And there I began working with companies, and I worked there for 3 years and was the industrial liaison between the treatment center and the companies. And one day when I least expected it and had no idea it was even coming, God offered me an opportunity to have my own center. And I have my own center now, a counseling center that works with companies, and everything has come to me. I have pursued none of it. I have just done what I needed to do to stay sober. And I know this program works because I am a perfect example of God, of getting what you try to get for yourself. Everything has come back to me. I just try to stay sober, and all these things are added into me. And I have such gratitude in my heart. I can't even describe it. I was telling somebody this morning, I have to pinch myself to believe all the things that have happened to me. I just feel so fortunate. It's because of alcoholism. I hadn't become an alcoholic, none of this would have been possible. I'm so grateful that everything has happened to me. I wouldn't trade 1 minute. I wouldn't trade a single experience. I'm so grateful that God has not asked me to read about life in a book. Most women my age have to read in a book what I have actually experienced. And I'm here to tell you that is a benefit. It is not a detriment. It is a benefit. I'm so grateful that I've gotten to live life. God has let me be one of the chosen people who got to live life, who got to experience a whole lot of it. And the sorrow as well as the joy, and the pain as well as the pleasure. I believe I'm a richer human being because of what I've gone through. I don't think I would be anything but a vegetable, bored housewife if I had not become alcoholic. And now I feel enriched. I feel like I have a lot of power through God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never occurred to me I would like me. Never occurred to me that I would ever like who I am. But I like me. I love me. And it's because you have loved me, and you've shown me a way to love myself. And I can accept my limitations, and I can I know I'm adequate. I would like rebuttal time with that psychiatrist who told me I would never be able to live a day of my life without Thorazine. I would like... I would like for him to follow me around for 1 hour and just see how adequate I am. But all of this is possible because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I always like to close with a thought for the day in the 24-hour book, because it's special to me because it's my sponsor's birthday that day. It's on October 27th. It's a real special thought for the day for me. And it says, I can help my fellow alcoholic. I am of some use in this world. God has given me a new lease on life so that I can help my fellow alcoholic. All that feeling of futility is gone. My life has meaning and direction. God has spared me all the hazards of my alcoholic life to bring me at last to a place of real usefulness in this world. He has let me live for this. It is my opportunity and my destiny. At last, I am worth something. And I always was worth something. But it took the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for me to feel that worth and to see that I had a contribution to make to God's world. And I thank you for that. And I love being here with you, and I love you, and thanks for having me, and I'm having so much fun with you.
Lord of mercy, it's happened again. I'm in love all over again. Thank you, Toni. You made us laugh. You made us applaud. You made us cry. And when you make this old dog cry, you've done a job, I'll tell you that. Bless your heart, we appreciate it. I've got one resentment I've got to get off my back this morning. Unluckily, I happen to be treasurer of this group, an ex-banker who was relieved of that responsibility. Thank God. A treasurer, a couple other groups. God, can you imagine passing a basket in this group? But they won't let me do it. Toni, again, thanks. Bill, thanks for reading. Let's close this meeting in our usual fashion, and we'll see you about 6:30 tonight. Oh, yeah. Let me give this to Toni before we start. I forgot. Our love and appreciation.
Thank you.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive